Usually when you think of strategy, you think of a game of chess.
Right, yeah. Classic example.
Like 64 squares, clear rules, perfectly visible pieces.
And a completely dead board.
Exactly, dead board. You sit down, calculate your moves, and you just sort of assume the environment itself is entirely neutral.
Which is almost never the case in reality.
Right.
But what if, and this is the core of our deep dive today, what if the strongest army isn't the one that wins the war, but the one that makes war completely, I don't know, irrational?
Oh, I love that framing. It's so counterintuitive.
Today, we are unpacking this massive, absolutely fascinating source document. It details a highly evolved philosophy of military strategy and game theory known as Val's doctrine.
Yeah, Val's doctrine. It's incredibly dense.
It really is. And the very first thing this doctrine asks you, the listener, to do is essentially just burn the chessboard.
Just throw it out entirely.
Yeah, because in reality, the board is alive.
Yeah.
And it is actively trying to destroy you while you are, calculating your next move. It is the absolute definition of a hostile, living ecosystem.
Right.
War, in this framework, it isn't a flat plane. The document calls it an adaptive mountain.
An adaptive mountain. I love that metaphor.
It works so well. You're climbing this rock face, but the mountain actually watches you.
That's terrifying.
It is. It changes the weather based on your altitude. It deliberately hides the safe paths. It cuts your ropes when you get too comfortable.
Oh, wow.
And most dangerously, it learns from your last step. The environment itself is a combatant.
So to give you a mental shortcut for today's deep dive, our mission is to decode how intelligent players actually win or deter or just simply survive when they're pinned on that adaptive mountain.
Yeah, just surviving is hard enough.
Exactly. We are moving way past that basic textbook side A versus side B logic.
Right, the stuff you learned in high school history.
Yeah, we want to uncover the hidden incentives, the severe information asymmetries, and the immense psychological pressures that actually govern human conflict.
Because before you can even attempt to climb this mountain, you really have to figure out who is actually on it with you.
Right. And according to Val's doctrine, the most dangerous players are never the ones you see on the surface.
No, never. Val's philosophy views military strategy fundamentally as decision-making under hostile adaptation.
Hostile adaptation, right?
Yeah. A mature strategy isn't about blind conquest or some romanticized notion of, the lone warrior seeking glory at the peak.
Right, it's not a movie.
Exactly. It requires disciplined force, a commitment to shared ascent, and deciding which mountains are actually worth bleeding for in the first place.
Because some of them just aren't.
Many of them aren't. But to make that calculation, you have to understand the sheer density of the hidden players dictating the game. I mean, military games rarely feature only two minds.
Yeah, I mean, when you watch the news, you see the visible players, right?
Someone's on the map.
Right. States, military commanders, soldiers pushing front lines. But if you look beneath the surface, the state itself is not a single rational mind.
Not at all.
It's this chaotic coalition of competing incentives, all forced to wear one flag.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how the doctrine breaks down those factions.
Right.
You have the military commanders who want mission success, sure, but they also desperately want to preserve their forces.
And they don't want to lose their troops.
Exactly. Then you have intelligence services who want accurate pictures, but they are terrified, absolutely terrified of being blamed for a failure.
Oh, the bureaucratic blame game.
Always.
Yeah.
And then you have domestic audiences who demand total security and national pride, but they have zero tolerance for casualties.
Right. They want to win without losing anyone.
Which is mathematically impossible in a major conflict. And let's not forget allies who want collective defense but are terrified of footing the bill.
Everyone wants the security. No one wants to pay for the bunker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can't forget future decision makers either.
Wait, future decision makers, how are they playing?
They are watching the current conflict solely to judge the precedent being set.
I see.
Every single one of those hidden players is pulling the ropes on this adaptive mountain in entirely different directions.
Which radically alters the true goals of a conflict.
Completely.
Because the obvious goals are, capturing territory or securing a border.
Sure, the surface level stuff.
Right. But the hidden goals are preserving political legitimacy, avoiding public humiliation.
Keeping rival political factions at bay.
Yes, and keeping allies loyal, which leads to a really dark place mathematically, according to the sources.
Oh, the tragedy of military goals.
Yes, the tragedy of military goals. Because of all those internal pressures, a player sometimes doesn't actually seek the best objective outcome for their nation.
Right.
They seek I think the document calls it the least unacceptable loss.
Yeah, the least unacceptable loss, meaning they will accept horrific, mathematically indefensible battlefield losses just to preserve their alliance's credibility.
Or simply to ensure the political survival of the regime back home.
Right, and this single dynamic explains why deterrence fails so often in the modern world.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, you cannot deter a political leader with the threat of battlefield losses if that leader fears a domestic uprising more than they fear your army.
But wait, I want to push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Aren't the generals the ones making the real moves? I mean, how much does a domestic audience actually matter in, say, a dictatorship?
That is such a common misconception.
Really? Because we often assume dictators have total control so they don't have to worry about public opinion.
Right, but if you read Val's doctrine carefully, they actually care far more.
More than a democratic leader.
Yes, because the penalty for losing audience support in a democracy is just losing an election. You go write a book and give speeches.
Right, you retire.
But in an autocracy, the penalty for looking weak is losing your life in a violent coup.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that changes the math.
Completely.
Right.
If backing down to a foreign power makes them look weak to their internal rivals, they will gleefully send thousands of their own soldiers into a meat grinder.
Just to maintain the illusion of absolute strength at home.
Exactly. The domestic survival incentive will almost always override the external strategic logic.
So it transforms the conflict into something completely unreadable to an outsider.
If you're only looking at troop movements, yeah, you're missing the real game entirely.
It's like, okay, imagine playing a massive multiplayer board game like Risk.
Yeah, great analogy.
On the surface, you're calculating probabilities, right? Moving little plastic armies around the board.
Climb the dice.
Rolling the dice. But underneath the table, half the players are secretly kicking each other.
Forming side alliances.
Exactly, forming alliances and plotting to overthrow the person hosting the party.
Right.
You cannot possibly predict what a player will do on the main board if you don't know there's a knife aimed at their leg under the table.
The board game analogy works beautifully, but with one terrifying addition from the source material.
What's that?
Time and nature are also playing.
Okay, explain that.
Time is perhaps the most ruthless silent player on the board. It bleeds some actors through attrition, while it strengthens others who are just waiting out the storm to regroup.
So you aren't just fighting the visible enemy or the hidden domestic factions.
No, you are fighting the decay of your own resources.
So if the mountain is this chaotic and you have this tangled web of hidden players pulling against each other, I mean, fighting your way to the top seems like a fool's errand.
It often is.
Val's doctrine suggests the ultimate goal isn't to win the bloody battle, but to win before the violence even starts.
Yes. You have to build an architecture of deterrence.
Deterrence, let's dive into that.
Deterrence is a concept that gets dramatically oversimplified in popular discourse, I think.
Oh, for sure. People just think it means having a big stick.
Right. But Val's text gives it a highly specific, very aggressive definition. It is not passivity. It is weaponized prevention.
Weaponized prevention.
Yeah. Val's cardinal rule is do not beg the enemy to stop.
Never beg.
Never. You range the mountains so that they look up, calculate the sheer physical and political cost of the climb, and decide entirely on their own that the summit simply isn't worth their blood.
And the text divides this architecture into two distinct categories, right?
Yes. Deterrence by denial and deterrence by punishment.
Okay, so if deterrence by denial is essentially building an impenetrable wall, like saying your attack will mathematically fail because our cyber networks are too resilient or our air defenses are too thick.
Exactly. You deny them the possibility of success.
Then deterrence by punishment has to be the threat of what happens if they actually manage to break through.
Yes. It's not about stopping the initial attack. It's about promising a retaliation so devastating they wish they hadn't bothered.
So denial removes the prospect of success, and punishment guarantees an unbearable cost.
You nailed it. But implementing either of these requires manipulating the payoffs of classic game theory archetypes.
Game theory. Okay, let's get into the math of it all.
Don't worry, it's not actually math.
Thank goodness.
We all know the basics of the prisoner's dilemma, right? But Val's doctrine applies it specifically to the structural nightmare of arms races.
Right. It's not just about two prisoners sitting in an interrogation room.
No, it's about two rival nations who would both be significantly wealthier and safer if they just cooperated.
But they don't.
They don't. because mutual fear dictates the environment. State A thinks, well, if I don't build more hypersonic missiles, State B will, and I'll be vulnerable.
And State B is running the exact same paranoid calculus.
Exactly. So they both spend trillions of dollars bankrupting their domestic economies to build weapons they actively pray they never have to use.
Which ironically increases the statistical probability of an accidental war.
Simply out of a systemic lack of trust. Yeah.
Okay, what about the game of chicken?
Chicken is the foundational logic behind brinkmanship.
Like two cars racing toward each other on a cliff.
Right. But think of it more as manipulating the belief in your own irrationality. Your actual resolve, your willingness to suffer catastrophic damage, becomes your primary weapon.
So you have to convince the other guy you're crazier than he is.
Basically, yeah.
And finally, the stag hunt, which I found fascinating because it maps perfectly onto military alliances like NATO.
It does. It's the classic collective action problem.
So the idea is a group of hunters can work together to take down a massive stag, right? And that feeds everyone.
Right.
But if even one hunter breaks formation to chase a small rabbit for their own immediate selfish gain,
The stag escapes.
the stag escapes and the entire collective starves.
Because the entire concept of collective defense only functions if every single member absolutely believes that every other member will sacrifice their own short-term interests when the crisis hits.
This all hinges on payoff manipulation, doesn't it?
Entirely. To deter an opponent, you have to convince them that their payoff for attacking is mathematically worse than their payoff for doing nothing.
And that requires what? Capability, resolve, and really clear communication.
Yes, crystalline communication. I mean, if you have a massive nuclear arsenal, but the enemy doesn't believe you have the political will to actually launch it, your deterrence is zero.
It's just a bluff.
Exactly. Conversely, if your threat is wildly disproportionate to the offense,
Like threatening a nuclear strike because a neighboring state moved a border fence 10 feet.
right, it lacks credibility. The enemy knows you won't end human civilization over a fence, so they completely ignore the threat.
It's fascinating how these massive geopolitical theories map so flawlessly onto everyday human behavior.
Completely. The sources actually use a great analogy of sibling deterrence over a gaming console.
Oh, yeah, I loved that part. It's identical game theory.
It really is.
So if sibling A hogs the console, sibling B might threaten to physically break the television.
That's deterrence by punishment.
Right. Or sibling B might just hide all the power cords.
And that's deterrence by denial.
It's brilliant.
We see it clearly in organizational dynamics, too. Think of a corporate manager trying to push through a highly unpopular policy change.
They usually face vicious resistance from a specific department.
Exactly. Now, instead of forcing a direct, bloody boardroom fight, which burns immense political capital, the manager alters the incentive structure.
How so?
They quietly tie the new policy's implementation to a significant budget increase for that very department.
Ah, so they arranged the mountain, so the department calculates that cooperation is far more profitable than resistance.
Precisely.
But let me take us back up to the geopolitical level, specifically with brinkmanship.
Sure.
Because the popular idea of nuclear deterrence is basically just the ultimate game of chicken where both sides rip out their steering wheels.
And wave them out the window.
Right. To prove they physically cannot swerve, the logic being, I've removed my own ability to back down, so you have to.
Vell's doctrine aggressively rejects that approach.
Really? Why?
Because bravery without an exit ramp isn't courage, it's catastrophic engineering.
Catastrophic engineering.
Think about it. If you create a situation where your opponent has absolutely no exit ramp, no way to back down while preserving some modicum of domestic respect, you guarantee a violent collision.
Because they have nothing left to lose.
Exactly. If an autocrat's choice is between total, humiliating public surrender that leads to their execution or launching a desperate apocalyptic attack, they will crash the car.
But I'm struggling with this exit ramp idea, honestly.
Okay, let's unpack it.
If we are talking about deterrence by punishment, about making the enemy deeply regret their aggression, why would we leave them a convenient out?
I hear what you're saying.
Like, if you leave them an exit ramp, aren't you just rewarding their initial hostility? Why wouldn't you just crush the opponent completely right then and there so they never dare cross you again?
That instinct is exactly what drives the seize the summit mentality, but it totally ignores the fundamental mechanics of punishment.
How so?
Punishment must shape future behavior, not merely satisfy a primal urge for revenge.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you back a nuclear-armed state into a corner where their only options are death or absolute humiliation, their most rational move is to pull the pin on the grenade and take you with them.
So leaving an exit ramp is how you survive your own victory.
Exactly. You want them to consciously choose to back down, and they can only make that choice if a survivable path actually exists.
That reframes everything. You have to prove you are perfectly willing to crash the car, while simultaneously pointing to a quiet side road they can take to escape with their dignity intact.
Yes, that is the delicate balance of brinkmanship.
But how do you actually prove your willingness to crash? How do you prove your threat isn't just a bluff?
Well, this brings us into the fog of war, where what you say matters far less than what it costs you to say it.
And this takes us into the realm of signaling, deception, and severe information asymmetry.
What the doctrine refers to as the shadow of the blade.
Shadow of the blade, that sounds so cinematic.
It does, but it's very practical. War is not chess, because in chess, both players share identical information about the board.
Right, you can see all the pieces.
But in war, the board actively lies to you.
Because every player is desperately trying to hide their true readiness, their actual casualty tolerance.
And the precise red lines that would trigger their escalation.
So how do you communicate in an environment where everyone assumes everyone else is lying?
You have to separate cheap talk from costly signals.
Okay, cheap talk, that's just words, right?
Exactly. It's a politician giving a fiery speech at a rally, or a diplomat issuing a sternly worded condemnation at the UN.
It requires zero resources and carries no penalty for lying.
Therefore, an intelligent opponent heavily discounts it. It is a costume, not armor.
I love that. A costume, not armor. So a costly signal, on the other hand, requires burning resources.
Limiting your future options.
Or putting your own domestic reputation on the line.
Yes. So, if a nation mobilizes a massive armored division, puts them on trains, and physically moves them to a contested border, that is a costly signal.
Because it disrupts their domestic economy.
It burns millions of dollars in logistics.
And most importantly, if the leader backs down after doing all that, they look incredibly weak to their own military command.
Exactly. They're publicly tying their hands to prove the threat is genuine.
And this manipulation of information cuts both ways, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. While costly signals are used to project truth, deception is used to corrupt it.
And the text points to Operation Fortitude during World War II as the ultimate masterclass in weaponized deception. I think we all know the broad strokes of that one. The Allies needed to invade Normandy, but the German high command was deeply entrenched waiting for them.
Right.
So the Allies didn't just try to quietly slip across the channel. They built a massive phantom army.
Inflatable tanks, fake radio networks.
Assigning General Patton to command this ghost force.
All to convince Hitler that the real invasion was coming at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy.
But what Val's doctrine focuses on is the cognitive mechanics of why Fortitude worked so well.
Yes, because the deception didn't just target the German reconnaissance planes, it targeted Hitler's foundational assumptions.
Right. Hitler already believed Pas-de-Calais was the logical target because it was the shortest route across the channel.
So the Allies simply fed his confirmation bias.
They didn't just want the Germans to look at Pas-de-Calais. They wanted them to confidently, actively choose to keep their panzer divisions parked there.
Even days after the real landings at Normandy had already begun.
Which is insane when you think about it. The best deception doesn't just hide the truth. It makes the enemy feel brilliant for believing a lie.
That is the core of the information-based strategy school. The central battlefield is human belief.
You win by manipulating the enemy's confidence in their own intelligence.
Exactly. A bluff works perfectly when the opponent cannot verify the truth, and the sheer cost of testing your bluff is too high a gamble for them to take.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Okay.
How does this square with Val's overall reputation? Because the whole document talks about Val's philosophy being rooted in integrity, truth-telling, and these really strict standards. If your entire strategy relies on feigning weakness or bluffing strength, aren't you essentially just systematically lying? How do you maintain integrity in an information war?
That tension is actually addressed directly in the doctrine's central rule regarding deception.
What rule?
Bluff rarely, prepare seriously.
Bluff rarely, prepare seriously.
A fake sword only works once. If you bluff and the enemy calls it and you fail to act, your future credibility evaporates overnight.
Because every costly signal you attempt in the future will just be treated as cheap talk.
Exactly. Therefore, a sharpened sword works before it is ever drawn. Integrity in strategy means that when you establish a red line, you genuinely intend to enforce it.
Ah, so if your baseline posture is rigid truth, the one rare strategic deception you deploy becomes devastatingly effective.
Precisely.
So while shifting the enemy's beliefs is incredibly powerful, eventually the fog of war clears, right?
It always does.
And brutal physical realities take over. You can't bluff your way across an ocean if you don't actually have the ships.
No, you cannot.
And the strategic rules you rely on change completely depending on the literal ground beneath your boots.
Which brings us to what the text calls the physics of the game.
The physics of the game.
The adaptive mountain is not a monolith. It contains entirely different subrealms of conflict, and each domain rewrites the physics of how power is applied.
Let's break down the mechanics of these domains because the differences really are staggering.
That's it.
First, land warfare. This isn't just about maneuvering, it is fundamentally about holding territory.
Securing vulnerable supply lines.
And the agonizing limits of human endurance. You can fly jets over a city all day, but eventually a human being has to stand in the mud and physically occupy that space.
Exactly. Now contrast that with naval warfare.
Right.
The ocean is vast and cannot be occupied in the same way. Naval strategy is about controlling access,
It relies on exploiting geographic choke points
maintaining ambiguity beneath the surface with submarines.
and weaponizing global trade dependencies. You don't necessarily defeat the enemy's navy, you deny their economy the ability to breathe.
Which leads us to cyber warfare.
The unseen blade.
Yes, this completely upends traditional game theory because of the attribution problem.
Okay, explain the attribution problem.
It's about hidden access and plausible deniability. If an adversary shuts down your national power grid, causing massive economic chaos, how do you mathematically calculate a retaliation if the malware was routed through proxy servers in 3 neutral countries?
Right, if you can't definitively prove who attacked you, deterrence by punishment becomes almost impossible to
We
enforce.
can't punish a ghost.
And then we must examine urban warfare and siege.
The most complex physical terrain imaginable.
It's a three-dimensional labyrinth, densely packed with a civilian presence that severely restricts your use of force.
In a siege, the primary weapons are no longer artillery. They are time and scarcity.
The strategic calculus shifts entirely to a question of endurance. Who breaks first?
The physical concrete of the wall.
The logistical supply chain bringing food to the defenders.
The civilian population suffering inside, or the political will of the leaders safely outside.
It's brutal. And the text highlights a terrifying modern example of how these domains interact, specifically looking at asymmetric warfare and choke points.
The Red Sea shipping attacks by Houthi forces.
Exactly.
It is a textbook demonstration of a weaker player imposing their will by refusing to play the stronger player's preferred game.
Yeah, let's unpack that, because you have a relatively small, non-state actor utilizing incredibly cheap technology.
$10,000 explosive drones.
Right, and basic anti-ship missiles.
Okay.
But because they are positioned perfectly at the geographic choke point of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait,
They don't need to sink an entire navy.
they just need to hit a few commercial cargo ships.
And instantly, global insurance premiums skyrocket.
Major shipping companies refuse the route and divert massive cargo ships all the way around the continent of Africa.
Which delays supply chains by weeks, costing the global economy billions.
And look at the required response from the stronger players.
A multinational naval coalition is forced to deploy billion-dollar destroyers
Firing $2 million interceptor missiles.
just to shoot down a drone built with commercial parts.
It's wildly asymmetrical.
The Houthis aren't trying to win a naval battle. They're waging an economic war of attrition.
Because they understand that in asymmetric conflict, power is not firepower.
Power is time, local legitimacy, and the ability to dictate the economic cost of the engagement.
If you are forced to wrestle a giant, you don't step into the ring. You hide in a cave system and make the giant waste millions of calories running around the mountain trying to find you.
Which brings us to the hidden skeleton that supports every single one of these domains.
Logistics.
Logistics. Strategy is merely a hallucination without logistics.
I love that quote. I always think of logistics like the engine room of a massive luxury cruise ship.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like, everyone praises the captain standing up on the bridge in a crisp uniform, looking at the horizon, making these dramatic steering decisions.
And the passengers are up on the deck taking photos of the sunset.
Right. But if down in the dark, sweaty engine room, a single crucial valve breaks or the heavy fuel stops flowing,
That massive ship is completely dead in the water.
the captain's strategic brilliance is suddenly entirely irrelevant. Enthusiasm doesn't carry an army up a mountain. Calories, diesel fuel, and artillery shells do.
And the brutal reality of those caloric demands is that a single nation, even a superpower, rarely has the capacity to survive that physical reality entirely alone.
At a certain point, the sheer weight of logistics forces you to tie yourself to others to share the load.
But tying yourself to someone else on an adaptive mountain introduces a terrifying new set of vulnerabilities.
Which leads us perfectly into the dynamics of alliances. The knots of the rope team.
Val's doctrine places a heavy emphasis on shared assent,
Shared assent.
the recognition that enduring security requires collective architecture. And the ultimate manifestation of this is an alliance commitment, most notably NATO's Article 5.
An attack on one is an attack on all.
It is the ultimate evolution of the stag hunt game we discussed earlier.
It massively multiplies your defensive capability, but it binds your fate to the decisions of other sovereign nations.
And the text identifies the two twin, conflicting phobias that plague every alliance.
Abandonment and entrapment.
Yes, these are the fundamental anxieties of the rope team.
Okay, let's go through them. Abandonment.
Abandonment is the terror that when the storm finally hits and you slip, your ally will suddenly calculate the cost, unclip their carabiner from the rope, and leave you to fall.
Because defending you is no longer in their domestic political interest.
Exactly.
And entrapment is the exact opposite nightmare.
It's the fear that your ally is reckless.
Maybe a smaller ally acts aggressively toward a larger neighbor, knowing you are legally bound to defend them.
They slip, and because you are securely tied to them, they drag you right off the mountain into a massive, catastrophic war you had absolutely no desire to fight.
That is terrifying.
It is. But beyond formal, codified alliances, the doctrine also navigates the incredibly fragile dynamic of cooperation with active rivals.
Like ceasefires, nuclear arms control agreements, and selective intelligence sharing.
Yes. The constant danger here is that cooperation can instantly tip into exploitation.
And the conditions for that exploitation seem highly specific in the text.
They are. It happens when verification mechanisms are weak or when the stakes are heavily asymmetric.
Meaning, one side views the treaty as a matter of bureaucratic convenience, while the other side views it as a matter of existential survival.
Exactly. Or simply when past betrayals have deeply poisoned the diplomatic water.
Right. A rival will frequently use a ceasefire not as a genuine stepping stone toward peace, but merely as a held breath.
A tactical pause to rearm.
To rotate their exhausted troops and prepare for the next offensive while you naively lower your shield.
Which naturally leads to a cynical question.
Which is,
If the stakes are this high, and the danger of entrapment is this real, and rivals constantly exploit ceasefires, why ever trust anyone?
right, why not just adopt what the text defines as the ruthless competitive school of thought?
Just dominate the board, rely entirely on your own internal logistics, and strike first whenever threatened.
Exactly. Why not just be the apex predator?
Because ruthlessness has a ceiling.
A ceiling.
Yes. It might win you a quick, brutal pass in the short term, but it will absolutely lose you the mountain.
How so?
The ruthless competitive strategy systematically creates permanent enemies. It triggers endless, exhausting arms races.
Right. If your reputation is that you betray your partners and exploit every vulnerability, no neutral nation will ever trade with you.
No one will share critical intelligence with you.
And eventually, a coalition will form that is entirely dedicated to your destruction simply out of self-defense.
Exactly. So Val's standard is an alternative to both blind trust and blind ruthlessness.
I call it structured trust, right?
Precisely. Cooperation is not lowering your shield and hoping for the best,
It is building a bridge with heavy guardrails.
and vigorously verifying the intent of everyone who attempts to cross it.
It's about meticulously aligning the incentive structures so that a betrayal is mathematically more painful for them than sustained cooperation.
Rivals only become temporary allies when they face a shared disaster risk or a mutual enemy.
You aren't building a friendship, you are engineering a limited-purpose coalition.
A bridge with guardrails.
But even with the best guardrails, miscalculations happen. Signals get crossed.
They do.
And when an opponent decides to deliberately test your red line, you are forced out of the realm of deterrence and onto the most dangerous terrain in game theory.
The ledge of escalation.
The ledge of escalation. Let's unpack the mechanics of escalation control, risk assessment, and brinkmanship in practice.
Escalation is where theoretical strategy meets the absolute abyss.
Because the ultimate goal here isn't to immediately launch everything you have, right?
No, absolutely not. Escalation control is about applying just enough pressure to break the enemy's will to continue, while actively preventing the conflict from jumping to a catastrophic, uncontrollable level.
And the text points to the Cuban Missile Crisis as the historical masterpiece of this delicate balance.
It is the defining case study.
So, when the United States discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being secretly installed in Cuba, the immediate instinctual response from much of Kennedy's military command was the seize the summit approach.
They advocated for an overwhelming, massive airstrike to destroy the missile sites before they became fully operational.
Because through a purely tactical lens, that solves the immediate physical problem.
But Kennedy recognized the catastrophic failure modes of that approach.
Right. What if the airstrike missed a few concealed missiles?
Or, more likely, what if the Soviets viewed the airstrike not as a localized tactical move, but as an existential attack on their global prestige,
Triggering an immediate retaliatory strike on West Berlin.
which could have spiraled into World War III in a matter of hours?
So Kennedy needed to apply immense, undeniable pressure without forcing a spasm of uncontrollable violence.
Which is why the choice of a naval quarantine was so brilliant.
He surrounds Cuba with a ring of warships, physically preventing further Soviet supplies from arriving.
But the specific language used was a costly signal of restraint.
He didn't call it a blockade, right? Because under international law, a blockade is a formal act of war.
Exactly. Calling it a quarantine applied physical and political strangulation, but it gave Soviet Premier Khrushchev that vital exit ramp we talked about earlier.
Khrushchev had the physical time and the political space to order his ships to turn around without looking to his own hardliners like he was surrendering under fire.
It avoided mistaking mere capability for credibility.
The U.S. had the capability to carpet bomb Cuba, but doing so would have lacked strategic credibility because the subsequent cost was global annihilation.
It also beautifully avoided the sunk cost trap, the toxic idea of letting past investments or sacrifices dictate future strategy.
Kennedy optimized his decision for the correct metric, global survival,
Yep.
rather than just securing a localized tactical victory that ended the world.
The sources outline how different schools of thought process a crisis like this, and it really illuminates why Kennedy's synthesis was so crucial.
Let's break those schools down.
Sure, if you only look through the lens of the rational optimizer, you calculate payload yields, count the ships, and assume the enemy will back down simply because they are mathematically outgunned.
But if you only use the psychological school, you ignore the math entirely and focus obsessively on the leader's ego.
Their fear of public humiliation and their domestic paranoia.
And the systems thinker looks at how the global supply chains and complex alliance networks will domino if a single shot is fired.
Val's doctrine demands that you integrate all of them. The defining question is, which lens sees the part of the mountain I am currently on?
If you apply a coldly rational lens to a deeply psychologically motivated enemy who feels cornered, you will miscalculate horribly.
And trigger the exact war you were trying to avoid.
And that danger of miscalculation is massively amplified by uncertainty, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The sources detail how ambiguity creates a vacuum, and fear immediately fills that vacuum.
Okay, imagine this scenario. Side A moves a battalion of troops toward a border purely for a routine, scheduled training exercise.
But Side B is already paranoid due to recent political tensions.
They read that movement as the opening phase of a surprise attack, so Side B immediately mobilizes their own forces defensively.
Side A sees Side B's sudden mobilization, panics, and thinks, aha, they were planning an attack all along.
So Side A escalates their posture to high alert.
And the feedback loop spins totally out of control.
You get a war neither side actually wanted, entirely driven by defensive panic.
This is exactly why the text emphasizes the Val risk test.
The Val risk test. What is
Before you take any major risk, before you authorize any escalation, you must ruthlessly ask yourself, what is the worst survivable outcome of this action?
Are we acting from a place of clear, calculated strategy, or are we acting out of a sudden sense of national humiliation?
Because if your ego is driving the escalation, you have already lost control of the board.
Okay, so you manage the panic, you communicate clearly, you leave the exit ramps, you perfectly navigate the ledge of escalation, you break the enemy's political will to continue fighting, and you finally reach the summit.
The enemy waves the white flag.
Now what?
Now comes the hardest and most neglected part of the entire doctrine. War termination.
War termination. I think we collectively forget this as a society.
We dedicate thousands of books and entire academic departments to how wars start.
And the tactical minutiae of how battles are won. But effectively terminating a conflict requires an entirely different, highly specialized skill set.
It requires complex political bargaining, the establishment of credible security guarantees,
Meticulously sequenced withdrawals.
and the incredibly difficult task of managing spoilers.
Define spoilers in this context.
Spoilers are the radical factions on both sides of the conflict who actually benefit economically or politically from the violence continuing.
They view any compromise as treason.
And they will actively try to sabotage the peace process with sudden, unprovoked attacks designed to reignite the war.
Which feeds directly into the overarching theme of the aftermath, what Val calls the false peak.
The false peak.
The philosophical evolution of this doctrine teaches that a brilliant tactical victory on the battlefield is nothing but a false peak if the brutal nature of the climb itself destroys the meaning, the purpose, or the underlying stability of the world you were trying to protect.
If you burn the village to the ground in order to save the village, what have you actually achieved?
Exactly. If your strategy is to completely annihilate the enemy, utterly humiliating their civilian population, dismantling their institutions, and crushing their economy into dust.
That defeated enemy doesn't just quietly disappear from the map.
No, they go underground. They transform into a bitter generational insurgency.
Their executed leaders become unassailable martyrs.
The trauma of their absolute defeat becomes the founding, radicalizing myth for the next generation's war.
You haven't solved the geopolitical problem, you just delayed it for 20 years and ensured the next war will be exponentially more vicious.
Which elevates us to the transformational strategy school discussed at the very end of the text.
The realization that the highest possible form of strategy is not simply mastering the rules to win the current game.
It is utilizing your power to actively change the underlying structural conditions that made the violent game necessary in the first place.
Because the danger of a short-term, decisive victory is actually profound.
You can win the bloody battle. You can capture the enemy's capital city. You can completely dominate the peace negotiations because you hold all the leverage and the guns.
But in doing so, if you employ ruthless methods, you might permanently lose your moral authority on the global stage.
You might deeply alienate your closest allies who are horrified by your brutality.
You might completely shatter the trust of your own domestic population.
You win the geographic hill, but you inherit an absolute unmanageable mess.
You inherit a wasteland that you now have to pay to police and rebuild.
It feels like a massive paradigm shift. We spend this entire deep dive analyzing the intense mechanics of how to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlast a hostile opponent.
We dissect weaponized prevention, costly signals, manipulating payoffs, and navigating the subrealms of combat.
And the final, ultimate realization of the doctrine is essentially a warning. Make sure you don't win too hard.
I wouldn't frame it as winning softly. It is about not confusing the summit of the mountain with the end of the journey.
Right. The mountain doesn't vanish just because you planted a flag on top of it.
You still have to climb all the way back down.
You still have to live in the valley below, right next to the people you just defeated.
If your victory is so absolute, so uncompromising, and so brutal that it creates a post-war world you cannot safely live in.
A world teeming with bitter insurgents, terrified and distrustful allies, and permanent economic instability.
Then you haven't actually won anything.
You have just successfully delayed your own destruction.
True strategy, the mark of a mature player, is ensuring that the aftermath is stable.
Wow. That is a heavy, incredible place to land. Let's trace the full arc of the journey we've taken today because the density of this doctrine is staggering.
It really is.
We started by tearing up the chessboard and realizing that conflict is a living, adaptive mountain filled with hidden domestic players, silent actors like time, and competing incentives pulling in every direction.
And from there, we established that the highest strategic goal is to win without ever firing a shot.
Deterrence is not a passive shield. It is the active, aggressive architecture of making aggression mathematically too costly to pursue.
We learned that restraint isn't surrender, but a calculated choice.
We learned that cooperation between rivals requires rigorous verification. The bridge must have guardrails.
We saw that in the fog of war, cheap talk is worthless, and signals only matter if they carry a profound cost.
And perhaps most practically, we saw that unbridled aggression without logistical calories or a clear exit strategy for the enemy is just deadly theater that ends in mutual destruction.
And crucially, we learned that a true strategist must be infinitely adaptable.
You have to recognize which subrealm you are currently fighting in, whether it's the mud of the land, the trade choke points of the sea, or the unseen blades of cyber.
And understand which psychological or rational school of thought actually applies to the opponent standing in front of you.
I want to connect this massive global framework directly to you, the listener, because while we've spent this time discussing nuclear brinkmanship, massive naval coalitions, and global alliances, the core, fundamental logic of Val's doctrine applies to the conflicts in your own life.
It absolutely does.
Whether you are navigating the chaotic politics of a corporate boardroom, trying to negotiate a highly tense contract, or honestly, just trying to make sense of the chaos on the evening news.
Remember that true power isn't just about having the most leverage or yelling the loudest.
True power is the ability to shape the other person's choices.
It's about manipulating their payoffs and incentives before the conflict even begins.
It's about carefully arranging the mountain so they independently choose the exact path you wanted them to take all along.
And to leave you with one final, Val-inspired thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
The next time you find yourself aggressively fighting to win a bitter argument, to secure a hard-fought deal, or to utterly defeat a rival in your own life, take a breath. Pause.
And ask yourself the single question that separates mere warriors from true strategists.
What happens the day after you win?
What happens the day after? Because as we established right at the start, when you step into the real world of strategy, the environment is never neutral.
The board isn't dead.
You are climbing a mountain that fights back. And the true master isn't the one who claws their way to the peak the fastest. It's the one who builds a path that survives the storm. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.